Al Capone is the prototypical celebrity gangster. He's bigger than Chicago.
Around the world, people knew who he was. You tell somebody you're from Chicago, and what do you get? Oh, Chicago, da-da-da-da-da.
To some, Capone's a man of the people.
He was like Robin Hood, right? Everybody loved him, so nobody would rat him out.
It was the quintessential story of good versus evil, G-men versus gangsters. But no one is above the law, not even Al Capone.
For a brief moment in the 1920s, one man managed to turn crime into a corporation. His product wasn't steel, oil, or cars, but alcohol, gambling, and vice. His offices were the speakeasies and alleyways of America's second-largest city. By the time he finished, he controlled an empire that made more money than some of the Fortune 500 companies of his day, giving him power and sway over politicians, newspapers, and anyone who dared try to stop him. But despite presiding over murders, robberies, and extortion, this murderous magnate also had a softer side. He donated to charity, fed the poor, and smiled for the camera, even as he ordered hits in broad daylight. To the public, he was both villain and celebrity, proof that the American dream can belong to anyone with the audacity to seize it. This is the story of Al Capone, the gangster who became America's most unorthodox businessman. Though he would forever be associated with Chicago, Alphonse Capone was actually born in Brooklyn, New York in 1899. Like so many kids of that time and place, he was the son of poor Italian immigrants who had left their home country to chase the promise of America. His home was as blue-collar as it gets. His father, Gabriele, was a barber, while his mother, Teresa, was a seamstress. And young Alphonse, no doubt, paid close attention as he watched his parents work endless hours for pennies. With 9 children to feed and a wave of anti-immigrant sentiment to contend with, they had little option but to keep their heads down and earn money however possible. From an early age, Capone proved that he was equal parts intelligent, charismatic, and restless. He showed promise as a student at his strict Catholic parochial school, but had trouble following the rules, a nuance of his personality that would become a major theme in his life. Instead, Al preferred to do his learning on the streets, where, in the crowded immigrant neighborhoods of New York, gangs of all age groups used muscle and intimidation to get their way. At 14, he punched a teacher and was finally expelled for good. Compared to the rest of his criminal career, this was little more than a small act of rebellion, but it revealed something deeper about Capone's psyche: an intolerance for authority, and a belief that respect had to be taken, not given. After brief stints as a baseball player, candy store worker, and bowling alley attendant, Capone met 2 people who would change his life forever. The first was his wife, May. The second was notorious gangster Johnny Torrio, who soon showed the restless young man an alternate path to the dream he'd been chasing. While still in his late teens, Capone was already running errands for Frankie Yale, a Brooklyn mobster who tutored him on the economics of prostitution, protection, and petty theft. Soon after, Al became associated with small-time gangs across the New York area, including outfits like the Junior 40 Thieves and the Bowery Boys. Eventually, he worked his way up to the powerful 5 Points Gang, where he finally got the chance to sink his budding criminal teeth into the prosperous world of Manhattan. Even amid government crackdowns, these gang networks thrived in what was essentially the center of the global economy. There was never any shortage of scams to run, immigrant shop owners to intimidate, or shiny in-demand products to steal. New York taught Capone everything he needed to know about power, leverage, and the benefits of illegitimate business. By the late teens, he was well on his way to becoming a heavy hitter in the underworld. Still, that didn't mean he was invulnerable. One night, while working the door at Frankie Vale's Coney Island dance hall, he inadvertently insulted a woman whose brother quickly slashed Capone in the face with a knife. The fight left him with 3 scars across his cheek. Though he found them humiliating, the wounds also gave Capone something extremely valuable: his nickname, Scarface. In time, it would become his brand. In 1919, Capone left New York for Chicago at the urging of Johnny Torrio. The latter had been recruited by a top Chicago crime boss, Big Jim Colosimo, and he needed muscle to protect the outfit's collection of brothels and bookies. Chicago was perhaps the most corrupt city in the country at the time, and Capone instantly recognized it for what it was: a system just waiting to be scaled. The only problem was that a person could only make so much off women and running numbers. If you wanted to really build an empire, you needed a product everyone wanted. Capone got his wish in 1920 when the Prohibition Act banned alcohol across America. What the temperance movement saw as critical moral reform, Capone saw as market disruption. After all, the nation still wanted to drink. They just needed someone to supply the booze. Unfortunately, Colosimo didn't go for it. He wanted to stick to the business he knew, believing the feds would focus their attention on alcohol. In response, Torrio flew in Frankie Yale to take Big Jim out. After the assassination, Torrio became the boss and Al became his right-hand man. Immediately, the two New York natives began incorporating bootlegging and speakeasies into their criminal empire. The way they saw it, if America were going dry, they would make their fortune keeping it wet. For years, Capone studied every aspect of the business model. He traveled to Canada to meet bootleggers and smugglers. He cozied up to Torrio and the captains to gain insight into what it took to run the operation. More importantly, he saw firsthand that every cop, politician, and judge had a price. But as any good businessman will tell you, where there's money, there's competition. And in Chicago, that competition was deadly. Torrio retired from the mobster life in 1925 after he was nearly killed in an ambush by a rival gang. That's how Capone, still only 26, suddenly found himself in charge of the Windy City's underworld. From the get-go, Capone ran his empire like a corporation. After all, aside from the illegality of the products and services provided, there really wasn't much difference. Those bribes to judges and cops, overhead, the raiding of rival speakeasies and territory, hostile takeovers. Capone even took part in market segmentation, dividing the city into territories and establishing distribution routes for bootleg liquor. As his monopoly over Chicago crime grew, he bought breweries to control the supply chain and hired teams of accountants to track revenue. At its peak, his empire employed thousands of people, including bartenders, drivers, guards, couriers, and enforcers, each one loyal to what had become a massive criminal conglomerate simply referred to as the outfit. Capone's operation brought in an estimated $100 million a year, which amounts to roughly $1.7 billion in today's money. Thanks to his executive expertise, it became an economy within an economy, complete with departments, payroll, and Christmas bonuses. Yet, what made Capone so unique was the fact that he didn't live like a mobster. Rather than hide in the shadows, he put himself out into the world, the same way a Rockefeller or Vanderbilt might. He hosted charity events, posed for photos with politicians, and courted reporters. The press loved him, and the people did too. To them, Capone was a man who was standing up to a system that had failed them. While the government preached morality, Capone provided escape in the form of a glass of bootleg whiskey, a night of music, and a few moments of freedom. Chicago's love for Al Capone only increased during the Great Depression, when he opened one of the first soup kitchens, serving some 3,000 meals a day to out-of-work citizens. On top of that, he sometimes personally handed out cash or groceries, paid rent and utilities to families, and tipped extravagantly everywhere he went. He was a modern-day Robin Hood and a public relations dream before anyone had even thought up the concept. But underneath the polished image, Capone's criminal machine kept expanding, and the streets of Chicago would soon pay the price. Prohibition had turned Chicago into a marketplace of shadows, and Capone owned most of it. Nearly every bar that poured liquor, every truck that moved a barrel, and every cop who looked the other way was part of his network. By the late 1920s, corruption had seeped into every level of the city. Police officers drank in the same speakeasies they were supposed to raid. Judges were seen dining with gangsters. Politicians accepted donations that looked suspiciously like envelopes full of cash. Capone was on top of the world, but that only made him a bigger target. At first, he was able to remove the rival gangs who dared to threaten his monopoly. He and his men managed to do this quietly for years, but that all changed on Valentine's Day, 1929. That night, 7 members of a rival gang were lined up in a garage on North Clark Street, where a group of men dressed as police officers mowed them down with Tommy guns. The newspapers called it the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and for once, the public was horrified. Up until that moment, Capone had been thought of as an innocent, if somewhat dishonest, businessman. Nobody cared much about illegal booze and the occasional brothel. At first, they refused to give up on the city's favorite son. If something bad happened, they assumed he would fix it so it didn't happen again. But over time, it became increasingly clear that violence wasn't a byproduct of Capone's business machine. It was a feature. By the late 1920s, Al Capone had transformed Chicago's underworld into a business empire. In fact, the outfit ran smoother than most legitimate corporations. It helped that he owned the city in every sense that mattered. Through a combination of bribes and threats, he ensured that his influence reached from the mayor's office to the streets. That way, every shipment of liquor, nightclub performance, and political favor flowed through him. Nowadays, historians like to claim that Capone was rebelling against America's values, but in reality, he was embodying them. He was the very picture of the quintessential American man, hungry for success, enamored with money, and willing to take risks. In the land of opportunity, Capone took more opportunities than most, and for a while, no one dared stop him. Before we get into our subject's inevitable downfall, it's essential that we understand how he saw himself. Because Capone didn't think of himself as a criminal, he thought of himself as an entrepreneur. Inside the Lexington Hotel, his de facto headquarters, he ran his operations with precision and careful calculation. He didn't operate on impulse or let his temper get the better of him. Had he gone into a more traditional business, he would no doubt have been just as successful. His brand helped a lot. Behind the scenes, he was Scarface, a man who would kill you and your entire crew if you crossed him. In public, he was all the businessman who loved his wife, helped his neighbors, and took care of everyone from the bartender to the bellhop. He had weaponized the American dream, proving that success and criminality weren't opposites, but different points along the same line. By 1930, the government could no longer ignore Capone. His empire had grown too visible and his violence too public. The country had grown tired of the constant blood in the streets, and politicians were eager to make an example out of the man who turned crime into big business. Still, it's not easy to take down a man with so much power. In the 5 years since becoming boss of the outfit, Capone had inserted his syndicate's tentacles into almost every aspect of Chicago life. And so, federal agents quickly discovered that normal tactics wouldn't work. Witnesses vanished, juries were bribed, and every attempt to charge him with murder or bootlegging ended in silence. That's when the Treasury Department decided to try a different approach. It was integral to Capone's brand that he be seen as successful. As such, he flaunted his wealth openly in the form of silk suits, diamond jewelry, expensive cars, and luxury homes. This was a problem because, on paper, he claimed to earn almost nothing. So the government decided that if they couldn't prove he'd committed crimes, they could at least prove he hadn't paid taxes on the profits from them. It was a bureaucratic solution to a criminal empire, and it worked. Investigators spent months building a case showing millions of dollars in unreported income, following receipts, property deeds, and ledger notes scribbled by his accountants. That's how, in 1931, Al Capone was finally charged with, of all things, tax evasion. The irony was brutal. After years of outrunning bullets, the thing that finally brought the world's most infamous mobster down was bookkeeping. But Al wasn't ready to roll over just yet. He immediately offered to pay the taxes he owed, only to find out that the charges were essentially a proxy for his other crimes. The government wanted a message. No one, not even Capone, was above the law. After a highly publicized trial, Capone was found guilty of all counts and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. And that's how the empire that thrived on capitalism's loopholes was undone by capitalism's oldest rule, accountability through numbers. When the prison gates closed behind Al Capone in 1932, the empire went silent. The man who had commanded a small army of gangsters now stood in line for meals, stripped of his silk suits and swagger. But even far away from Chicago, in Atlanta Penitentiary, Capone's entrepreneurial spirit, as you might call it, could not help but rear its ugly head. He bribed guards for extra comforts, slipped money to inmates, and tried to rebuild his hierarchy inside the walls. Earlier in his life, he had spent 8 months at Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. There, his cell could best be described as opulent, boasting multiple pieces of furniture, a lamp, and luxury decor. When the Atlanta guards got the impression he might be angling towards a similar situation, they took drastic measures. They transferred him to Alcatraz, a brand new state-of-the-art prison designed for men just like him. On the Rock, Capone's empire didn't matter. No amount of money could buy privilege. He was just another inmate, identified by a number instead of a name. And that, perhaps, is what finally broke Chicago's most notorious gangster. Well, that and untreated syphilis. During his stay at Alcatraz, Capone's body and mind began to fail him. The man who once negotiated million-dollar deals could now barely string together a coherent sentence, his memory and grasp on reality fading in real time for all to see. Still boasting his trademark facial scars and fierce presence, Alphonse now spent his time sweeping floors and humming old Italian songs. Once in a while, he would tell the guards or his fellow inmates that he was still running Chicago. When he was released in 1939, he was a shell of his former self. He moved into his Florida mansion, where he was surrounded by luxury but imprisoned by dementia. According to family members, he spent his final years fishing in the backyard canal and talking to himself about business deals that no longer existed. He died in 1947 at the age of 48. Perhaps the saddest fact of all was that Capone didn't live to see himself transformed into a myth. Hollywood had become obsessed with the man once he'd been sent to prison, producing both parodies and tributes in the form of charming outlaws in pinstripe suits. In the following decades, his legacy would be shaped through cartoons, films, books, and documentaries. The brand, it seemed, was even stronger than the man. The uncomfortable truth is that Al Capone built a criminal empire using the same principles that built America's greatest corporations: innovation, branding, and PR. Despite lacking a formal education, he understood that success wasn't about morality, but momentum. He gave people what they wanted: escape, excitement, and a sense of independence. You might say the same thing about movie producers, cigarette makers, or Walt Disney, for that matter. And for a while, the country lined up to thank him for it. Unfortunately for him, the same system that rewarded his ambition eventually punished it. He found every loophole, exploited every weakness, and in the end, became a casualty of the very game he mastered. But the myth lives on, because Al Capone didn't invent the American dream. He exposed it, and he proved so successful at doing so that even now, his name sells movies, tours, and t-shirts. It's enough to make you wonder what legitimate business people out there today might be hiding behind their own empires, and if they've learned anything from Al Capone's downfall.